Welcome to our interview today with Bill Decoursey. Bill, tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and your first impressions of moving to Fridley.
Well, starting with my family, my dad was born in 1900, and he went to work after he graduated from high school. He graduated from East High School, which was over on off of University Avenue in East Hennepin, and he graduated in 1920. Before Edison came in, a couple of years after that.
Do you know when East High School went away? Because in my lifetime, I don't remember.
Well, I'll tell you, they didn't tear it down or anything, but they made it into business places, and they opened it up into different stores and stuff like that, to the point where you didn't recognize it as a school.
Sure.
But they used part of the buildings, and it was located over, I don't know, at that time on about 4th Street and well, it wasn't East Hennepin, it was where Central Avenue came in there. There was a bandbox.
Sure.
Or it wasn't a bandbox, it was the hamburger place.
Okay. Yeah, I know the area where you're talking about, Northeast.
Yeah.
So back to your dad, okay? When did you move to Fridley?
Okay, well, we'll get to that.
Okay.
Okay. We actually, Dad, when he graduated, went to work for his grandparents, who had a resort in Annandale. And so he spent his teen years and stuff like that working at the resort, and in the late 20s, he sold his share in the resort that he had to a cousin, and invested the money into Breezy Point Silver Foxes, which was owned and operated by Billy Fawcett. And Billy Fawcett was from Robbinsdale, and he did publishing of a little book called Captain Billy's Whiz Bang. And that's where today the Robbinsdale
Whiz Bang Days
celebration is Whiz Bang Days. Sure. But he also published comic books. Captain Marvel was one of the comic books that he published there. And Dad, after he graduated, he came in. He went to work for Billy Fawcett for a while as editor of the Captain Billy's Whiz Bang. This is a reprint.
Okay.
But it was sort of kind of a humor book and philosophy and whatever you have it. This is a reprint of it. And he was about that time in the late 20s, the Great Depression hit. Mm-hmm. And Dad had invested his money in the Silver Foxes, and the customs in the 20s, of course, was fur coats worn both by women and men. And And of course, the market for silver foxes went down, and Dad lost all of his investment. But he was still working, according to the census, he was still working for Billy Fawcett in 1930. That was about a couple of years before I was born. And, after the Depression hit, Dad lost all of his money. He had started building a home, and he had it all framed in, and he couldn't get enough funds to pay the mortgage on it. So from that point on, from 1930 on, he kind of jumped from job to job during the Depression. It wasn't unusual for people to be out of work. And I was born in by the way, my brother was 10 years older than I was, and I had a sister 9 years older. And I came along at the wrong time, right at the beginning of the Depression in 1931. And I came in at that time, and Dad was out of work, and I was born at a charity hospital on the east side, St. Andrews. I was trying to find out where it was located, but I do know that I had a picture showing that it was a charity hospital. And at any rate, at that time, Dad was kind of jumping from job to job, and a couple of years later, or not from job to job, but also moving. He moved about 3 times during that period because he couldn't afford to pay the rent.
Understandable.
And my brother wrote about some of this in his memoirs. My brother was editor of the Edison High School newspaper and annual and so forth, and so learned a little bit about publishing and so forth. And later, he went to war. He was in World War II, went to the Pacific. When he came home, he started writing he quit his job at the Sioux Line because he had before the war, he'd taken a job at the Sioux Line as a Boilermaker. Of course, after the war, they didn't need Boilermakers because they were converting all the steam engines to diesel. So he took a job working for the Spring Lake Park Crier, which of course was the newspaper for what is now the Fridley area now too. And and he was writing a column called Fragments. And what he had done when he was in high school, he had started to keep a diary. And he kept this diary from the time he was in high school all the way through World War II, when he was with the Signal Corps over in the Pacific. And but he kept a diary of things that he did every day. So when he retired, he wrote his memoirs, and I'm including a copy of his memoirs in the material that I give you, and it's about 1,000 pages long. Mm-hmm. So makes good reading, though. It's kind of interesting because he was very very good with literature and stuff like that, and he like I say, he wrote a column for a while, but eventually he bought his own paper up in the Mille Lacs Messenger, and published that for many years before he retired. Of course, he's passed away now, but at any rate, he goes into great detail, much more than I can cover here in this conversation.
What's the time frame of his memoirs?
The time frame is from the time that he was born, and when they moved to different places in northeast Minneapolis, and when they moved to Fridley, and what he did in Fridley, and a lot of the people, neighbors in Fridley and whatever.
What year did your family move to Fridley?
My family moved to Fridley in, I think it was 1933 or 34. Now, I wasn't very old at that time, so I don't remember. I think one of the questions is, what do you remember? What's your first impressions?
Sure.
Well, I think I do remember a little bit, because one of my first impressions when I came to Fridley was the first thing was they guided me to show me how to get from the house to the outhouse, because in northeast Minneapolis, on all the homes that we were in had plumbing and electricity and this kind of thing, and we were moving, and Dad had, like I say, Dad had trouble making the rent, and we kept getting, according to Fred's memoirs, we kept getting eviction notices, but Dad knew of the homes in this abandoned brick factory in Fridley.
So tell people, by the way, we're interviewing Bill Decoursey. Bill, tell us where that home was in relationship to where Fridley is now.
Okay. It was the second house outside the Minneapolis city limits on Marshall Street.
Which is now East River Road,
yeah.
As you travel up.
Marshall Street was the division between Minneapolis and what was Anoka County. It was the county line. There was no city of Fridley. It was Fridley Township at that time.
Okay.
And we moved about 1934. I was about 3 years old.
Okay.
And it was located, I'll show you on the map. We're going on the computer later on. I'll kind of go through some things. But it was located exactly where the parking lot is for the, I don't know if it still is, but here about 3 or 4 years ago, I think it was a training place for emergency.
Okay.
Do you know where that is?
I know the basic area you're talking about.
Okay.
I wasn't even aware.
Yeah. Well,
having been a member of Fridley for over 50 years, I had never even heard of the Swanson Brickyards till this interview topic.
Well,
came
it was located, and the only reason I know that is that the 2 trees that were in our front yard, they were, I think, box elder trees or something like that, as I recall. But there are two trees that are still standing across in the fronts, inside the front fence of the water treatment plant.
Mm-hmm.
And but on the corner of Marshall Street and 37th at that time, inside of Fridley, the first building there coming in, there were some houses and stuff on the Minneapolis side, that are all gone now too. That whole community has disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
But the first building was a gas station that was run by one of the grandsons of C.J. Swanson. And then there was a road that went up just north of 37th that went up to the Swanson houses. There was C.J. Swanson's mansion was on the river. And then there were two other Swanson homes of his relatives that were on that road. The C.J. Swanson residence, my brother and later on I cut the lawn there. We did the chores. I remember going up there to clean the ashes out of the furnace at that time. And usually I get paid, usually 25 cents was the thing, which doesn't sound like a lot, but back in those
days, that was pretty good.
Cents, and I could use the 25 cents. I could go over across the river to Camden and go to the movie for a dime. A double feature movie on Saturday matinee for a dime and have 15 cents left over to go to the bandbox that was located there in Camden to buy a hamburger and a drink.
Do you remember the name of the bandbox?
Oh yeah, bandbox.
Bandbox, that was the name.
It was the bandbox.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it was the bandbox, and the bandbox was a bandbox because they had a bandbox at the door, and then there was in the little booth that they had the bandbox that you could put a nickel in and play music.
Mm-hmm. I can remember the days.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were there many streets or other houses in that area where you lived?
Well, there was in the area we lived in. The only street was Marshall Street,
okay,
and 37th.
Mm-hmm.
37th was the one that went to the Camden Bridge.
Sure, over the river.
Alongside of that, there was a little sort of kind of a park that was maintained by the people at the pumping station there. And they called it Peanut Park because in the spring, when the thaw came, there'd be a little pond or lake or something there, kind of in the size of a peanut. And in the summer it dried out, of course, and that's where all the kids in the neighborhood would go to. The teenagers and stuff would go there to neck in the lilac bushes and stuff like that.
It was Columbia Park in my day, so.
Yeah, and so my brother and sister spent a lot of time over there in that park. And then, of course, the main park was across the river, was the Weber Park. And that was much different than it is now. There was a lake in there, there was a dam and a waterfalls. I have pictures of that that I can show you.
That'd be great.
There was a waterfall and a dam, and it dammed up to make a lake. And then on the shore of the lake, there was a bandstand. And this bandstand had band concerts and stuff like that. As a matter of fact, I have an article that I mentioned in the Minneapolis paper, was reporting on one of the concerts there, and they mentioned my name in it. I was 5 years old, and I was leading the audience and take me out to the ball game.
Good story.
So, and but that was and they had that was the entertainment back in those days because there was no television and radio had just come in about 4 or 5 years before I was born. And as I grew up, I learned all of the lyrics to songs for actually the last 5 generations. And I have an interest to music today because you store the lyrics to songs and music in a different part of the brain, and it's helps you stave off the old age, memory loss, and this kind of thing. And actually, in the last 5 or 6 years, I've gotten interested in. I'm a regular at crooners.
Okay.
In Fridley.
They put you up on stage so you can sing?
No, I don't go there, but I spend a lot of time entertaining family and this kind of thing.
Nice. So your memories of that time. Tell me, Fridley Township. Where'd you go to get groceries? Were there churches?
There was no grocery store in Fridley Township.
Huh? Okay.
Well, there sort of was. I know I remember going with my dad there to a Paling's store. And that's where he went. We were on, the family was on, what do you call it? Relief or whatever, at that time. And he'd go to a Paling's store, which was in Fridley, but it was kind of up the hill, over the tracks, over the Northern Pacific tracks. And I think it was located on about 43rd and 2nd Street.
Okay.
And there was a grocery store there that was operated by the Paling family. They lived in the upstairs, and the downstairs it had an awning on it in the front. And in addition to groceries, they handled the relief commodities that if you want, you could, and Dad would go up there to get the monthly commodities, and it included mostly things like cornmeal and whatever. We ate a lot of cornmeal mush for
sure.
And flour and whatever, and our house, I'll get to that a little bit.
Were there dirt roads? Were there any paved roads at all at this time?
The only dirt road was, there were dirt roads. There was a dirt road going up from Marshall Street up to Swanson's. And along that, there was 2 other houses that were, there was Howard Swanson's house was right on the corner of Marshall Street and that road going up. And I visited there a few times because the little girl who was a couple years younger than me, Diane Swanson, that grew up there, and I'd go to the birthday parties and stuff like that. I was really, really honored because I was invited to these wealthy people's parties and stuff like that, so. But that was on the corner They're right across from the gas station, which was when we moved in there. It was run by one of the Swansons, and later on by the Shack, by the Shack family.
So did you have a car at the time? Were there cable cars? How did your family get around?
We had a car. The first car I remember, Dad had a 1929 Buick that you started with a crank.
That's why you had children, right? So they cranked the car for you?
Yeah. So, and had isinglass windows and stuff like that. I think it was a Buick, I think, as I remember.
Okay. Were there many churches in the area at the time?
There was no churches on that side of the thing. There was a church over that I had been baptized in the Methodist church in Northeast Minneapolis, and my brother and sister were baptized there.
Okay.
And that was located on Lowry Avenue and Taylor.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was the one church, and then later on, after we moved, there was a Methodist church over in North Minneapolis, North Methodist, and that was across the Camden Bridge and over, kind of across the street from the Weber Park on Fremont Avenue.
44th. So where did you and your brothers and sisters go to school then?
Okay. When we moved in there was no school in that area. At least not on the not in the one west of the Northern Pacific Railroad. There were no schools in that area for the community they built up around the brickyards. So when we moved in, Fred writes about that in his memoirs too. When we moved in, there was no, Dad hadn't really paid a whole lot of attention when he decided to move in there. But Fred and Judy went to school then at Oakwood School.
And where was Oakwood?
Oakwood was in Columbia Heights. Up the hill, kind of overlooking the Northern Pacific Railroad. Of course, they had to cross over the railroad tracks in order to get there and climb up that. It really was more than a hill. It was a cliff, really. And as a matter of fact, further north, on about 43rd, there was a quarry there where they had, and I remember as a kid going up there and looking for fossils and stuff like that on the thing in the quarry. You can still see it today. There's sort of kind of, if you look from the East River Road, you look over, then there's kind of a cliff behind where the railroad goes through. Okay. And it was kind of overlooking on the top of the cliff, Oakwood. Matter of fact, I think up until recently, this building was still there. As of about maybe 10, 12 years ago. I don't know what happened since then.
Mm-hmm. What did it become after it was a school, do you know?
Oh yeah, it wasn't a school anymore. I mean, it was something else went in there. But Oakwood was the closest elementary school at that time. So Dad didn't like the fact that the kids had to, and some of the neighbors didn't like the fact that their kids had to go through the thing,
mountain climb to get to school. I tell my kids I did that my whole life.
Do that. So
yours was for real.
so Dad was elected president of the school board for that area there of the Panhandle, coming down there, that area of Fridley Township.
And what was his first big decision?
His first big decision was to reroute the kids to Minneapolis Public Schools, Schiller School, and Edison High School. But Schiller's, I don't know if you're familiar where Schiller was.
I'm not.
Schiller was on just off of Marshall Street. Would have been on well, let's see, what would that be? That would be just off of Marshall Street on and Lowry.
Okay.
And I went to Schiller from kindergarten through the 8th grade.
Okay.
And we were bused from Dad's only duty as head of the school board there in Fridley was to sign the checks to pay for the bus the kids from the bus stopped at that gas station that I was talking about. Mm-hmm. That's where they picked up the kids.
Okay.
And as a matter of fact, that's where I was. That's where I was when World War II started. That's the first I heard of that. That it was a Monday, and the day before Pearl Harbor had been bombed, and I went to wait for the school bus in the gas station, and everybody was gathering around the radio listening to all the war, mm-hmm. all the war news.
Well,
so I can remember the beginning of World War I, or World War II rather.
You said your brother had to go to the Pacific in the war.
Yeah, he was drafted in the actually, it wasn't that long later. He had gotten married, and 6 weeks later he was off to basic training, and they sent him. He was drafted at Fort Snelling, but he had knowledge of. He'd been in the Boy Scouts, and he had knowledge of Morse code. That he'd got Morse code, and both from that and his job that he had at the Sioux Line. You know, they used it in the railroad, to send messages, over the tracks and stuff like that, mm-hmm. to the trains and whatever. So he knew Morse code and he knew semaphore. So they sent him down to Hattiesburg, Mississippi for training. And he was the only Yankee in the Dixie division. But they needed somebody for the Signal Corps down there in that unit. And so he went, he went to the Pacific then. He drove a Jeep. And
whereabouts in the Pacific was he, do you know?
Yeah, he was on New Guinea, Morotai, Mindanao. He was in the Battle of Mindanao to liberalize that.
Okay.
And he writes all about that in his memoirs.
Okay. So when did they tear down your house there? Do you know?
No, I don't. It would have been sometime after 1950.
Okay.
I don't think it was occupied after we moved out that I know of. But I've been in touch with a daughter of Wanda Pajak. Pajaks were our neighbors next door. They were the second house from the gas station.
Okay.
Was the Pajak residence. I have pictures of that. And
do you remember what year they tore it down?
Well, it would have been early 50s sometime.
Okay.
I'd say sometime before 1956. I think when they started to do all the changes and when they tore the bridge down and replaced it. The Camden Bridge was torn down after we left, and they replaced it with a new bridge. And I think that took place in preparation for the interstate, when the interstate went through Camden and just basically annihilated it and stuff like that. It's much different than I remember it.
Yeah.
You know, the only thing remaining there is the bank building, and I've got pictures of that too.
Okay.
That's where my dentist was, Dr. Ostrud. I think Dr. Ailing had his offices there on the second floor too, up above the bank.
It's a Greek restaurant now, I think, isn't it?
Pardon?
The bank building.
Yeah, the bank building's still there, I think.
It is.
Yeah, it's the only thing that remains of Camden.
Yeah.
Of the, that I'm aware of, at least.
My grandpa's a couple of years younger than you, and he remembers that area very well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I spent a lot of time in Camden, and that's why my first 3 years of high school, there was no high school in the Fridley area, so most of the kids went to Edison High School. But I had spent so much time over in Camden, I had a lot of friends and stuff over there, and I had my choice. I could either go to Edison or I could go to Patrick Henry. So my first 3 years in high school, I was in Patrick Henry, and then my senior year, I went to Edison, graduated from Edison.
So I'm one that I know nothing about the Swanson Brickyards. What can you tell me about the Swanson Brickyards?
Okay. Well, across the street from my house, there was a clay hole. And my understanding of it, that C.J. Swanson, when he was a Swedish immigrant, and the story was when he was digging a well, he had hit clay, and the type of clay that they'd used over in Sweden to make bricks. And so the story was that I'd heard, at least, that's why he went in the brick building, and he was also did fireproofing a building. He founded a fireproofing company, so the brick complex was fairly large. It was pretty huge. Prior to that, he'd had a lumber business and so forth, where they'd a sawmill where they'd bring the. Matter of fact, I was reading some of this stuff that where they'd float the logs and stuff down the Mississippi River, and then he'd get them. He did that, and they also cut ice out of the Mississippi, and then they'd use the sawdust from the sawmill to bury the ice. They take these big blocks of ice out and put them there, because I can remember as a kid going and playing in that big pile of sawdust and digging down. In the middle of the summer, you could dig down and go down about a foot or so and hit ice, and that's how they kept the ice from thawing in the summertime. They bury it in the sawdust.
It's amazing.
So
what are your memories about Northern Pump?
Okay. Northern Pump Company was about a quarter of a mile north of us on the east side of Marshall Street and Highway 100, which is now 694. Mm-hmm. And Highway 100 was the belt line going around the city. Mm-hmm. And the Northern Pump Company was, I'd say, was probably in a little one-story building about, maybe 1,000 square feet, give or take a little. And when World War II started over in Europe, the United States didn't get involved with it for a while, but they were supplying armament and stuff like that to the European countries that were in war. Mm-hmm. I think I mentioned that I was about 10 years old when the war started, mm-hmm. and that was the first I'd heard of it, But at any rate, so leading up to the war, I'd say probably starting about in 1939, the owners of Northern Pump, it was located, I'll tell you where it was located. It was located across from the, I worked for a while. They would pick the kids up at school and take them by truck to work on the truck farms. And Mike Evanoff had a truck farm across from Northern Pump. And it was in the property that formerly had been the Rydell property. Now, I don't know, you might be familiar with the Rydell home. Mm-hmm. Well, that was occupied by Mike Evanoff's family at that time. And Northern Pump was just kind of across the road, across the East River Road from that area is where it was located. But at any rate, they got the contract from the government to start making armaments and stuff like that. Of course, it grew very quickly, when the war broke out. Mm-hmm. And Dad worked for Northern Pump for a while. Actually, when the war broke out, Dad got a job first at the munitions plant in New Brighton. But it was it wasn't real convenient for him to get there to work and stuff like that. And of course, he wanted to go to work at Northern mm-hmm. Pump, but at that time they were frozen to their job. They couldn't quit their job if they were in defense work. But he got laid off for 2 weeks at the New Brighton plant. And so he went and during that period of time, he went and got a job at the Northern Pump because it was right in our backyard, practically.
New Brighton doesn't sound that far away to us now, but probably at that time, that was quite a haul to get out to New Brighton.
Well, you know, that New Brighton area, you know, that was it's to this day, I think just recently that they've cleaned it up, but it was the biggest contaminated
I think it still is on some level.
And then I believe in 1941 or 1942, President Roosevelt actually visited the arsenal in New Brighton.
Yeah. So. Yeah, but it's I understand now they're going to develop it into a city.
Well, the Vikings originally were looking at the site for the new Viking Stadium and then the entertainment center around it, but at any rate,
getting back to Northern Pump, that grew very fast, and of course, about that time, it was on the East River Road, but they figured, well, there'd be a lot of traffic on there, so what they did then, they moved the East River Road east of where it was. And I'll kind of show you some of that on the map and stuff like that is how they, but it went through our backyard. Then Dad had went through the area where Dad had his little mini chuck garden, but Dad was very, very very good at surviving. You know, he jumped from job to job and got laid off here and worked. He pumped gas. He sold shoes. He did a variety of jobs during the 30s. And during that time period, shortly after we moved in, he saw all this acreage of land between our house and the Northern Pacific Railroad was vacant, and that it was railroad property. But he went to talk to the railroad guy and wanted to know if he could plow up a couple of acres of land beyond our house and put in a garden. And the railroad guy said, well, gee, he says, I don't know. He said, nobody's ever asked. He said, but if I were you, you know, times were hard. If I were you, I'd plow it up and do it. Well, as it turns out, friends of the family, as a matter of fact, my future father-in-law was a truck gardener in Brooklyn Park, and he had several acres of land. Now he had the land now where that golf course is.
Okay.
Do you know where the golf course is there? Well, that was all my father-in-law's property.
Well,
or it wasn't. Yeah. That was, he had moved from Richfield. He was a farmer in Richfield. He moved out there at Brooklyn Park, and that was his property. Well, they were friends of the family. As a matter of fact, my mother and his wife had grown up and gone to school together down in Des Moines, Iowa. So, but he came out and he disked the land and plowed it up and stuff like that for Dad. And what he would do is he'd take his truckloads of produce from his farm out there in and any leftovers or anything like that, he'd come and dump in our front yard. And Dad put a vegetable stand outside, and built a little shack vegetable stand there and on the East River Road, right outside the Minneapolis city limits.
Okay.
And so he'd sell produce that he grew on the thing, and also the surplus produce that
Sure.
David Bird.
I think just north of you, I think there was a little produce stand called Bob's Produce at some point. That
Yeah, that was Bob's Produce. I think I was over on University Avenue.
was at University, not on East River Road.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that was on University Avenue.
Okay.
That would have been east of us.
Okay. And what would be your memories of Fridley Police or fire? Or
There was no,
None?
there was no Fridley Police and fire or anything like that. As a matter of fact, Swanson had this gas station. And behind the gas station, there was a very large, huge gasoline storage tank that was very close to our house, as a matter of fact. And it caught fire. Well, there was no fire service.
Mm-hmm.
There was no fire department.
About what year was
So-
this about?
I'd say 19, let's see, I was old enough to remember it, so I'd say probably 1937,
Okay.
38.
And how did it get put out?
Well, they called the Minneapolis Fire Department, and they came as far as the city limits, and they wouldn't come over and take care of the fire. And their decision was, well, we'll just let it burn. So we had to evacuate our home, and it finally burned out. But it had gotten so hot that I remember as a kid going over there, and the soil underneath, the sand and stuff had turned into glass. So,
That's hot.
But fortunately, that our home wasn't burnt down, and didn't. It was kind of behind Pajak's house. Just on the corner, just off of the 37th, on the north side of 37th, and on what at that time was the old, I call it the old River Road. And it's where that later on there was a restaurant put in there after we moved out. I'm trying to remember the name of it or something like that, but there was a restaurant or something in there for a while.
Okay. So what's your strongest, best memory of Fridley from the time?
Well, let's get back to the fire department.
Okay.
Okay. There was no fire services or anything like that, but it was partially, sort of under the jurisdiction of Columbia Heights, which was also part of Monovan. Mm-hmm. So I know Dad got acquainted with some of the officials there, and one of them was Judge Clyde Johnson. And Judge Johnson was sort of kind of the connection. He was sort of kind of the politician that was involved with both Columbia Heights and Fridley Township. And matter of fact, Clyde Johnson would come to our house and stuff like that. They got good friends with my dad, and they'd come in. Dad grew a lot of cabbage in his little garden in the back. They drew a lot of cabbage, and they'd come there annually. He'd come over to make sauerkraut and have their annual cribbage game.
Sounds like fun.
But Clyde Johnson's office, it was on in Columbia Heights. You know where the city offices are for? Okay, it was on the other side of 40th. It was on the north side of 40th. There was a row of. There was a one-story stretch of buildings that had the Columbia Heights offices and the court. That's where they held court. That's where Clyde Johnson held court.
Okay.
And it was across the street from where the firehouse is now in Columbia Heights.
Awesome.
But you'd asked me something. What was it?
I was just asking about your best memories of Fridley that you had.
Okay. Now, getting to Fridley, there was the gas station, then there was the Pajak family, then there was our family, and there was I can't remember the name of the lady. She was a widow that lived in another frame building. It was a smaller home, and then north of there was a duplex sorta. It was a one-story duplex, front and back. In the front area, there was first there's Whitchurch, and then they moved out, and the Art family moved in. Sonny Art was he was about a year or two younger than I was, but he was the closest to my age and playmate and stuff like that. Actually, it was Morris Art. They called him Sonny. Was a thing. So. But and he had a sister, Virginia Art, that during the polio epidemic got sick and passed away. She was about a year older than I was, but I was picked to be a pallbearer at her funeral. As a matter of fact, I had two of my friends. There were a lot of Schiller School that got polio during that period. That was about 7 years before the Salk vaccine, because I think the Salk vaccine was 1953, I think.
Okay.
And that period of time with the polio epidemic was very. Matter of fact, they closed the pool at swimming pool at Weber Park, and there were periods of time. I think there were about 6 months that we didn't go to school.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure.
So it was serious. But at any rate, I'm getting off the subject here. Okay.
It's okay. We're just about ready to wrap up. We want to thank you so much, Bill, for all the things you've shared with us today. I've learned about the Swanson Brick Yards.
Yeah, I was, and in this duplex, there was the Arnts were in the front, and then the Scheck family. Now the Scheck family, I think, was they were another Polish. Both the Pajaks and the Schecks were Polish. As a matter of fact, I had a lot of Polish friends, and I learned how to swear in Polish because I could do that with that and not to get my mouth washed out and soap with soap.
A good thing to learn.
So, but at any rate, that was that house, and then the next house was kind of. Then there was a railroad track, or what had been a railroad track, in between north of the Arts and Shock House. There was a railroad track that led from the Northern Pacific thing down across the river road to the brick factory. But it had been abandoned, but you could tell where the tracks, because the ties were still in, or the ties were still in there, and there was the tracks were gone, except there was still some of the rail plates that were in there that I would go and sell for scrap metal, because they'd come around with the scrap metal truck.
All right, we're going to wrap up our interview now, Bill. We want to thank you very much for all your thoughts today.
Yeah.